So this is the beginning of the How Shared Value Part 3. I can't see any of you because there's a bright light in my eye, but I'm going to call up my fellow panelists, starting with Marc Audrit from Western Union. He is the Vice President of Global Brand. And also Bryan Duffy from MKTG. He is the Executive Vice President of Marketing and Sales. I have Don Reed, who is a partner and director of sustainability and climate change from PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC. And finally, we have Chris Heck, who comes to us with a career as the president of the Red Bulls and former SVP for USA Basketball. So thank you very much. So we've heard this term shared value quite a bit. And I'm just kind of curious, who actually knows what this means? Or who saw Professor Porter speak last year? Can you raise your hand? Okay, so not that many. So it actually does have a framework attached to it. So I'm going to give you a little shared value refresher or introduction before we get into the panel, because I think it's important. This discussion is really designed to help you think about, in this world of having healthy communities and having healthy businesses, there's lots of good that you can do. So how do you go about thinking about what good you should do and how your strategy is going to add particular value back to your business? And I think one of the things that Professor Porter challenged us last year was, how do we move beyond philanthropy? Philanthropy is great and there's a place for it, but when you're a business, there's really an opportunity to drive value for your business. So how do we get more focused on the intersection of specific societal benefits in your business? So that's what we're going to focus on. And he had three different focus areas for this framework. The first is around new markets and new products. So it's how can you identify societal issues that could actually unlock new market opportunities for your business. I think a lot of the examples we heard around the junior jazz or the LGBT community as a new fan base in fighting discrimination opens up a fan base and market for those leagues that are tackling that. Similarly, productivity. This is kind of the second area of focus, which is all about efficiency or access to talent. So again, if it's thinking about HR or your operations, how do you extract more productivity? It might be about getting a broader pool of athletes. Again, if 50% of LGBT teens aren't playing sports because of discrimination, and you remove that barrier, you've got more talent coming in for the athletic world. And then finally, it's around local cluster development, which is particularly relevant to you guys in sports that have arenas or facilities. And that's about, what did you need in your backyards, around your facilities, to help your businesses thrive and succeed? So with that introduction, I'm going to turn to my panelists. And I want to start by talking about the strategic focus. So Don is specifically been focused a lot on strategy, but I want all of you guys to weigh in. When you think about doing good and good business, obviously there's a lot of things you could focus on. How do you help companies figure out where their particular value add is?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the chance to be here and talk about this. I think that for me, shared value really begins with strategic choices and deciding where it is that you have value at stake around social, environmental, and economic issues, and being clear about where you can add value to society and do well for your shareholders at the same time. And that sort of, we get almost euphemistic about those two, but that's actually really hard to do. And it's really the product of intention and hard work. And I was really struck by David Stern and Bryan France kind of talking about how they don't really compete. And I understand the way in which that's true, but every team, every league wants to be distinct. And so to think in a really purposeful way, saying, how is it that what we can do around these broad set of issues makes us really distinct and really fits with our overall strategy, whether that's around reaching new markets, getting more share of wallet amongst existing markets, geographic expansion, any of those, and perhaps many more. But it's really that fit and that connection between the value to the business and the value to society. When you get all three of those ingredients together, you get a whole different kind of effect that it's a virtuous circle that you don't have when you have something that's purely philanthropic.
Great. Marc, you have recently engaged in a big partnership, which Nick told everyone around, with UEFA and Europa League. And CR is integral to your strategy. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided that and how it emerged?
Sure. And I think it's a good segue actually with what we just heard. I think it's important to make sure that what you're going to do is legitimate. And I really think that in too many cases, I think we tend to forget that. And fans, consumers, have what I would call, some sort of bullshit detector that is really hugely well working. And obviously picking, football, soccer was kind of an easy decision. The real challenge came when, how do we activate? How do we build something that is legitimate, that is different, to your point, and ultimately that makes sense. And I remember sitting in a meeting with the agency, and they showed us a map where football fans were asked to position brands, and it was scary to read, because I think it started with the center, core, brands that, make sense. But the more, remote you are from the center, I think you start flirting with dimensions such as these brands have nothing to do with football. Mm. And the outer circle is they are exploiting football. Mm. And this is not a good place to be. I really think it reminds, and believe me, I think the brand names that were there were pretty big ones. I think people, but again, it goes back to fans being aware that in some cases it's just about, pouring money and just buying, in some cases, badging something and not going beyond that. And we were extremely, I would say, aware since the beginning that we had to overcome this dimension. It was kind of easy because I think, as you said, I think the cause marketing did not, come in the conversation as an afterthought, but was baked in since the beginning, because I thought that it was a great way actually to, build legitimacy, but also build differentiation, because ultimately that's I keep saying, the world is not particularly impatient to discover a new brand being active in sports. I think the long and the short of it, and our co-coms guys keep repeating it, I think nobody cares. I think, and we're proud and say, well, this is a press release, but I think, well, so what? So I think if you're not building and adding, a layer of relevance and something that is true to what you do, and I think that's really where it starts. And I was almost amazed by a few things I heard before. In some cases, people kind of copying each other, etc. I think it's a bit scary. I think, and almost kind of thinking that, well, thanks God, in 4 years' time, I think there will be a new presidential election and we can start, spotting new ideas. I really think that clubs, leagues, governing bodies, etc. I think you guys are sitting on a gold mine. I think you have everything it takes. And Spider-Man would say that with great power comes great responsibility. I think it's almost insane that we're not seeing a lot more things like that, because I think we collectively and the ones representing sport, I think you have a huge, amazing power. I think in the marketing world these days, I think people keep speaking about content. To be honest, I think the ones who really have content are you. I think, and probably the music industry and Hollywood. Mm. But I think, so the brands are just trying to kind of leverage these things, and I really think that, I just don't see huge level of imagination throughout the thing. But yeah. I really think it started with being legitimate. I think it's so critically important.
Yeah, I think we've used the word quite a bit today, the word authentic, right? And we've talked a lot about the benefits of social change and social responsibility as a result of sport, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things we really haven't addressed and talked about is the risk that's involved from a standpoint of the brand to consumer. We look at it from a lens at MKTG from a standpoint of we're an agency that brings basically our brands and our partners and our clients and make that connection to the consumer. But if you don't do it from an authentic perspective, if it's not real, there is a BS factor that the consumer will sniff out. So there are a lot of inherent risks if you don't do it right from a brand perception perspective. So I think it's really important that it's a calculated risk. You do it for the right reasons. You do it with the right strategy, the right approach to build out the most impact and the effect that you can have. But the risk involved are pretty substantial if you don't do it right.
Chris, also in terms of choosing what your cause is, your issue, and thinking about new sponsorship categories as Commissioner Stern did, I mean, obviously working in the NBA and working with the Red Bulls, you know, you have your platform, and then you have your sponsors that have their platform, your athletes. How do you choose, you know, where the opportunity space is, what issues you should be focusing on?
I think what the NBA does with the umbrella of NBA Cares, you know, it's so smart, where they target certainly on everything that is cause related, but they target 3 different areas. And more times than not, your objectives with the sponsor can fall into those 3 areas, and then you can customize them as such. The same thing went with a local team, whether it's a soccer team or a basketball team, whatever, going back to authenticity and really understanding who you are and where you want to be. But at the end of the day, also listening to the sponsor or the prospect of what their agenda is and what their objectives are and how it can fit. So there's a little maneuvering, certainly, but you have to be a good listener, and I also think you have to know who you are.
Can you talk about it from the perspective of a business category in terms of driving new revenue for you? Did you find that it did, or did it just steal revenue away from other categories?
No, quick story. With USA Basketball and the men's and women's national teams, they tour every 2 years with the World Championships and the Olympics before the actual competition. And that's where the business is made. Well, what happened over the last, I guess, 8 years ago, or 10 years ago, with the teams had kind of lost themselves, and USA Basketball was actually a negative as opposed to a positive from the original Dream Team. So Jerry Colangelo came in, turned things around, and really had a different attitude. And that had to reflect on everything on down to the community relations. And the community relations were in these countries all over the world where the USA Basketball team was coming to play. And this would always be the hated team. So, and maybe it still will be because they win so often, but the attitude and the embracing of that local community was so important. So what was created was something called the Global Community Cup. It was the name of the tour. And the thought was, hey, can we get local or national and international sponsors to actually support this tour, which is USA Basketball, but also contribute back and give back to that local community while helping the image of your product or your team. And it was successful. So every charity was local. It wasn't just coming back to somewhere in the United States. It was local to that market, whether it was Madrid or Athens or Istanbul, it didn't matter. And that was a great way to embrace that local community and also achieve the objectives of a global property to your sponsor.
Interesting. Don, when we spoke prior to the panel, you talked about the importance of intention. And it's interesting, I heard a friend who works for one of my favorite basketball teams today talk about an exercise he did where he works on the community relations sponsorship team, where they had the team in a room and they said, okay, take away all the benefits you need to give back to your sponsors and the media and athletes and all that kind of stuff, and just design it as if you were having the impact you wanted to. What would it look like? And it came out, and then he said they actually ended up being able to sell that in a way. But can you talk a little bit about how important it is to have intention and how that might change a strategy?
Well, it's a great story. I think we're paying a little bit of homage to Michael Porter and his framing of all this, which I think is very useful here. And he kind of tells the story about companies thinking of their purpose as being to make money, and then realizing, many of them over time, that was, that didn't go away, but the way they did that was to really delight customers. And so now our purpose is to delight customers. And making money doesn't go away. It's still part of that equation. That's it's still the end game. And he really sort of argues that the next phase of that is really to create value for society. The purpose of the company is to create value to society that will delight customers and other stakeholders, and you will make money. And that's the kind of sequence. But most businesses aren't really accustomed to think, well, how do we create value to society? And if you do that with intention, an open and creative mind, using sort of wide open processes like asking your athletes to say, well, what would you want to do? What do you think it would be? We really are just almost at the beginning of something kind of new in terms of how we think about the role of business, certainly as it pertains to sports, to say, well, maybe our role really is to add value to society in new and unique ways. Let's think about all the ways we can do that, and we still have to assure that that delights our customers and our stakeholders, and yeah, if we do all that right, yeah, we're going to make money.
I want to stay with the impact issue a little bit because I was asked to bring that up. And I think there's some interesting examples. I mean, Marc, you guys have been really specific about quantifying an impact, number of days of education or school days that have been contributed. But can you talk a little bit about whether was that a deliberate decision or was that a good marketing story, and how important is impact? And then maybe for you guys also, is that part of your process? If not, do you think it needs to be from a risk perspective or from a transparency perspective? And how might that change, the trajectory of this whole space?
I think it's key to literally walk the talk, as we heard several times today, and we thought that it's critical not just to say something, but to do something. I think the future, there's no doubt, I think will belong to the brands that are doing things, not just saying things. I think we moved from, brand building really moved from, what could be described as being bowling, where super bowling, I think I could even say here, where you throw, a big, huge hit with, tons of money on TV, to something that is probably closer to pinball, where you have to hit. And that's really why the case for content, I think, is so important. So back to your question, I think it's really important not just to say that we care, but really to demonstrate and really kind of, show with the numbers and the acts. And really we thought it was really key in the way we were kind of building this thing. And it's not just, about kind of building a nice story, it's just kind of showing impact and really kind of really demonstrating, putting, a light. And then that's where it starts to become a virtuous circle, because not only I think you're demonstrating something, but you're also kind of building a really interesting storytelling thing. Because I think with this very simple thing, saying every single pass that is going to happen during every game, actually we keep counting. I think after 4 match days, we are over 83,000 passes, which means 83,000 days of education. Now you start kind of connecting, the dots in a really nice way. So I think marketing, I think, has a tendency actually to kill words. I think look at what marketing did to new. I think new doesn't mean anything anymore. I think we just have to be careful. I think this is a good audience actually to kind of keep that in the back of our mind. I think let's make sure that marketing is not killing cause marketing or corporate responsibility, etc., by just thinking of it as a nice addition, something that that will come as an afterthought. So I think the more it will be tied to tangible, concrete things. And it comes with responsibility too, because I think it's not just the marketing guy saying, hey, that's cool. I think it's also the journalist kind of saying, hey guys, actually you were committed to create 1 million days of education over 3 years. Show me.
So is that going to change how you budget? I mean, is your marketing budget going to be around impact, and what's your cap? How do you figure that out?
Well, there's a commitment that says that over the next 3 seasons of the Europa League, I think we're committed to create 1 million days of education. But it's just a starting point. I think, what will make my day is we can double, triple this thing. Because, and this is really at the heart of things, it's a nice thinking of, merging what sports and the good things that are happening on the European pitches that will have, that will create a better in Colombia or in Senegal or in China. But, success look like being also able to productize this idea and also help consumers to also create days of education by behaviors as simple as when you retweet something, I think you may create a day of education. So I think The entire thing is just to kind of create a broader ecosystem that would have an impact on product, and then we're back to shared value in the real genuine definition, but not just in the way you sell things, but also in the way people are kind of prompted to behave.
But I'll bring it back to the impact aspect of it as well. As I look at it from a value proposition standpoint, what's the value in it from the brand perspective? What's the value in it from the end audience perspective too, the consumer or the beneficiary of any type of social responsibility or cause marketing, whatever it might be, and what's the end output, right? So I think those are some key dynamics that you've got to look at.
I would jump in there too, saying when a fan of a particular team or a property, they are engaged so much where they have the expectation that that's part of the entertainment value. And I just saw Matt Meyerson back there and with the Celtics, and they do something called Heroes Among Us. And it's the greatest thing ever. You go to any game at the Garden in Boston, and they bring someone up, and they talk 30 seconds, maybe a minute, on that person's personal triumph or community contribution. And every time it's a standing ovation. And by the way, it's presented by the Massachusetts Lottery. So there's no way the lottery will ever leave that. It's part of the fabric of the Celtics now. And it is really, truly phenomenal that the fans have now taken over where it's their, just like it's their team, it's their part of the fan experience.
I want to keep going on this. Sorry, my mic's not working, but we talked also, Bryan, about community and building community, and I think, Marc, also you touched on this around your productizing, and if you can get the fans engaged in it, then how is that driving community? Can you talk a little bit about where you see the intersection of social issues and that kind of imperative around building community?
Yeah, I mean, we've used the word community quite a bit here today, and I think it's really imperative that we understand what exactly is a community. Right? We're all a community here. We're all brought together by a common bond, by a common interest, a passion around sport. Right? We all made a conscious decision to get involved into the sports industry at whatever level it may be, whether it's on the brand side or on the agency side or on the property side and the team side and so forth. So for us, we look at a community from a standpoint of bringing people together, from a standpoint of creating connections, and they're brought together by these shared interests and these shared passions and so forth. But how do you help to amplify that effect? How do you help to basically curate that community, if you will, right? And there's a number of different things that you can do from a technology standpoint, from a word of mouth perspective. I mean, the oldest form of advertising out there, right, is word of mouth. And it's authentic, it's real, it's true. And I'm more apt to get involved in some form of a movement if a friend of mine is telling me that, this thing is a great thing to get involved with, as opposed to a brand marketer trying to shove it down my throat, right? So I think it's important that we, again, understand what a community is, what drives a community, how to curate a community through various different touch points, whether it might be through a live experience, through an online situation, through a digital perspective, through sport, obviously, and then help to kind of build out that community and help them basically create dialogue amongst themselves, okay? It's great for us to have two-way dialogue, but how do you get that community talking to each other to create that larger scale amplification effect that we're looking for, okay? When you do that, you have broader reach, you're going to have more impact, more value, and at the end of the day, it's going to be a better situation for your social marketing programs.
So I'm curious, sorry about that. We've talked also about, so first it's what do you focus on, and then how you go about it, which can also involve leveraging the assets of a sport entity, sponsorship, whatever. I'm curious from a sponsorship perspective in your different worlds, and Marc also, when you went to the table with UEFA and you said, we want to do a CR integrated sponsorship, did you want different things from that sponsorship? Do you want the same things? What are the most valuable assets in terms of advancing social agendas? And Donna, I'd love you to sort of even take it out of the marketing realm and think about from a societal change perspective, where do you think, what assets can the industry bring to bear that will have the greatest impact?
Okay. Well, sports as an industry has a huge range of assets, but to me, the most unique and powerful one is voice. And I work with companies that would kill to get 10% of the attention that you guys get, and they put, you know, just enormous amounts of effort into trying to get that, and, you know, in many ways sponsorship is all about that. And so the ability at the, you know, the athlete level, the team level, and at the league level to have voice around the issues is just enormous. And I think that the use of that asset is something that we're still kind of learning about. Well, what's the best way to use that asset? And I think that if we can think explicitly about agenda setting, like what should be on the agenda of the fan base, and what kinds of changes are you looking to be part of in society. And I just think of the simple example of Chris Kluwe, the punter for the Minnesota Vikings, who just as an athlete took a stand publicly on marriage equality. And it was a really pretty simple thing. People write blogs all the time, but it was because who he was and what he did for a profession that that voice had such a greater impact than others. And I think that just sort of hints at the ability of voice in sports to be agenda setting. And then I think the other one that I think we're probably a little more used to is voice for activation. So you've got in the community, you've got all sorts of people who are looking to take positive action. You've got organizations who are geared up to help them do that, and that the voice of sports is a great activator when you involve, you know, players and teams in that. You know, it's just a huge amount of attention that goes to that activation. And as far as I can tell, there don't seem to be any limits to that. I'm sure there are physical limits to what your players and teams will do, but the appetite of the community for that is enormous.
Yeah. Marc, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah. What is it? I think you asked, and it may be surprising when we have this conversation on this side of the ocean. The first time we told the UFA that we wanted to do something that was genuinely, you know, cause marketing driven, their answer was a blank. I think because. And it's interesting compared to what you have here in the US, where basically, and that's where you're at the forefront on many things on that dimension, you know, really kind of thinking, and to the point that, you know, you go to the extent that you're also packaging, you know, social, you know, responsibility things that can be, you know, bought by the sponsors. In Europe, it's not something like that at all. And as I said, the first feedback was, well, not sure that you can do that. I think we, UFA, are already heavily involved in cause marketing things, etc. And we do not allow actually our sponsors to do their stuff tied to the competition, which was a bit nonsensical. And we had a very interesting conversation with them, and they changed their minds because all of a sudden they started to realize that what we were trying to do would benefit them as well. But I think it's interesting because I think there's really a gap between how, you know, things are perceived here and how they're perceived over there. But things are changing really, really big time. When it comes to kind of say, did it have an influence on what we negotiated with them? Not really. I think it was more, you know, the case of reframing things. I think, you know, passes are happening on the pitch. I think what we just did is applying a different filter and look at this thing from a different angle. And we, you know, the real idea behind kind of saying, would be pretty neat to imagine that something that is happening on a pitch, on a football pitch in Europe, would have an impact, you know, where the players are coming from. Well, this is something we observed. I think final of the Europa League last year in May, two Spanish teams, Atletico Madrid and Athletic Bilbao, 3 goals were scored, and I think this really goes back why we picked this competition. 1 goal was scored by a Brazilian player, and 2 goals were scored by a Colombian one. And when the game ends, the first thing that these players do is they run and they take their flags. I think the Colombian Falcao runs with the Colombian flag, the Brazilian with the Brazilian flag, and it starts to be really crazy because even the Belgian goalkeeper was carrying a Belgian flag, which is kind of, okay. And this is really something that echoed something we observe every day in our business, which is what we call double belonging. You know, if you're migrants who migrated from India to New York, or from Turkey to France, or from Ivory Coast to Italy, I think there's something in you that still belongs to where you come from. And this thing we observe on the pitch, we did not invent. I think we just tried to kind of say, there's a story here that resonates really deeply with who we are, with the consumers we have, And we kind of thought, well, let's package this thing. So it's not about buying different rides. And it really goes back to the beginning of the conversation. It's really, where do you put the camera in order to tell a different story? And so in many cases, it's not, I think we heard extremely moving stories, early afternoon here. And in some cases, I think these were just observations and just doing things that were just there, but just combining and connecting things, which basically is the definition of creativity. So I don't think it requires, I would say, extremely tense conversation with the rights owner or with the team, etc. It's just open-mindedness, and that's what happened with the UFA, because first reaction was, not sure you can do that, and then all of a sudden, I think, when you start shifting gears, it happens.
So we have only a few minutes, so I'm going to wrap up real quickly and just leave you guys with the opportunity to share your insights for the audience around where you think things might be going, what some advice you might give to nonprofits or to others that are in similar positions about how they can prepare for this next phase of shared value. Why don't I start with you, Chris?
I would just sum it up as saying that, sport and teams in particular tied into communities, they have something that no one else can offer, and that is, and that goes for sponsors as well as fans and everything else. It is the emotional aspect, and it is the most powerful thing. And Dave Checkers was talking about it, David Stern, they're all talking about it. It is so emotional that it is binding to the community with your team, your sponsor, and your fan. And I would just ask one thing to think about, and I did this with different people in the past, is that think about everybody in this room that works in sports, what your big aha moment was. And it may have been when you were 8 years old, or the first time you worked in sports or something, where you're like, wow, this is special, this is better, this is a better experience than it would be if I was working in X corporation. And it is a true privilege for all of us, and it's fun.
Great. I come from the activist community. That was my whole first career, and one of the things that I've learned is that it's very hard as an activist. You care about so much about your cause that sometimes it's really hard to understand what the interests of your own partners are. And it's absolutely critical to your success as an activist to really understand the interests of your partners in sports and to think creatively about how it is that what your cause helps helps them succeed in their own way as an athlete, teams and leagues, because I think that's just a huge part of the challenge, and you'll be a much better collaborator as a result. And I think the second thing is being in this building. I just have to say, go Red Sox! I feel better now than I did at the end of the season.
All right,
but
on that note, I'm done. I'm out of here. All right, anybody with me?
I'm with him, so.
No, I go back to the question that you posed in terms of, where is the future and where is this going? And in my mind, in my point of view, it really comes down to really continue to drive value from a standpoint of corporate responsibility and what does that mean to, again, the end audience. I look at it from a technology and innovation perspective, right? Look at where we were 10 years ago, look at where we are today, and where can we go into the future, right? And how can we have such a bigger impact and reach the masses and create these massive movements driven by technology, driven by innovation, driven by these various different vehicles. And I think the sky's the limit, and that's what excites me. And that's something that we look at every single day in terms of what we can provide for our clients from a technology and innovation standpoint. So that's what I'm excited about, and I think it's going to be a bright future, where that's going.
For many years, if not centuries, I think, businesses and corporations were just obsessed by what do we do? I think, and, good old days, where you were just kind of in the business of making toothpaste and just adding red stripes, and all of a sudden you had something new. I think the what really dominated. And then, probably when we started, to go into the 80s, etc., I think it started to focus more on the how, and then, best practices. And I think some people made a fortune in kind of observing, good things, etc., and how to do better, etc. I think this is one thing that is clear these days, and it started probably 10 years ago. What really matters these days is why. Why are we doing what we do? Why should I believe you? Why should I come to work as an employee? Why should I do it again and again and again? Why should I trust you? And if you agree with that, and I think it's just common sense, I think cause and social responsibility, I think, is a huge lever. I think this is a no-brainer. So I think the question is not whether we should kind of look for it. I think the question is, let's do it, but let's do it in a differentiated way. Because I think in too many cases, and that's the last thing I'm going to say, in too many cases, it's really about copy-pasting things that have been done. And I think, and then we're back to authenticity, I think, because it just doesn't make sense. But I think the future is bright. I think the guy who created this conference will be rich and famous one day.
Well, just to recap, this is what I heard. Start with what's authentic, true to your business, true to where you're going to have impact. Deepen emotional connection with your fans, your community, your consumers. Grow it with the technology of the Obama administration, and we're all going to be fine. Great, thanks.